What's going on, y'all? So today I have an awesome video going over a little bit of the baits I like to use for this time of year, and as you guessed it from the title, it is going over the spawn. So here in Florida, we are in full swing. We're a little different than a lot of parts of the US, and we start our spawn very early, sometimes even December, end of December time, into January. I've caught a bunch of bass on beds in January here in Florida. And we go all the way up till probably like the late spawners, probably end of March. Barely ever getting into April whenever you guys are probably just starting your spawn. But I'm going to go over some of these baits, my favorite baits to use. Nothing too special about it. But let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we're going to go ahead and start with some of the hard baits. So for us to spawn, well, we don't really have to worry too much about water temperatures. For the most part, though, the spawn is around the high 50s into the low 70s is where you're starting to get all those spawning bass. And, Florida is a little bit different. We kind of, the only time we really have to worry is whenever there's a cold front, kind of pushes those bigger, those spawning girls off of the bed, pushes them out a little bit deeper, and then they'll come back in. But what I like to do is, and during the spawn, it's not like all of the bass are spawning at once. Some are in different stages. Some of them could be, out deeper. Some of them could be pushing up to staging and making those beds. Some of them could be in the spawn. Some could be post-spawn. But either way, here are the baits I like to use around that time. So the first off, I'm going to go with, and I'm going to give you the scenario for this too. Most of the time when I'm fishing spawn, I'm no deeper than 5 feet of water. And the first thing that I like to use a lot, and I didn't really trim this off, but I love to use a spinnerbait. And spinnerbait is one of my favorite baits to use, not only just during the spawn, but all times of the year. And I like to use these more in murky water or days where it's a little bit windy. You're not going to be able to see those bass on the bed as well. So you're kind of targeting more of those males that are kind of cruising around, looking to push those bluegills off of beds, or just keep them away in general. So we're targeting more of the males in this scenario, but you could definitely land some monster females. And I've done it before on a spinnerbait. And, but I like to go with like the chartreuse and white, or get like a shad pattern, even go into like a green, pumpkin, kind of orange or blue to it, mimicking a bluegill. And I just slow roll it, very slow, within that 5 feet of water. And the great thing about spinnerbaits is usually you can get these babies in close to structure, get them in tight in those grass, kind of where those bass are going to be pushed up for spawning, lay down trees. I do like to use a trailer hook, but in this scenario, you kind of have to take a risk if you want to get pushed back into more of that cover and take that trailer hook off. You might not get it, but tell you what, if a big girl hits it, you're probably going to get that baby on the hook. So this is my first one, like I said, more windy, cloudy scenario. Now, going into a moving bait that I like to use whenever it is more clear water situations on a nicer day, is I like to go, and sometimes I like to go with a bigger bait. And I'm going to go ahead and use one of my favorite swim baits, is the Citizen 6 by Working Class Zero. This bait is awesome. You can go ahead and put weights in the belly. I like to use, and this is a smaller one. I couldn't find a bigger one for you guys, but I like to use these like, weighted hooks, but they have like the flasher on the back. They have a little Colorado blade on the back of it. And, I like to use, usually with the Citizen, like a 6 or 7/0 beast hook, with a willow blade. But this bait works amazing. And you can kill it, let it just sit down on the bottom and kind of drag it along the bottom. And I've got so many hits just dragging big swim baits. And but I really love this swim bait. I think the design of it is amazing, and it works great. Alright, so the next bait I'm going to go over, I was going to use a Megabass Mag Draft, but I didn't have one on me, so I have the Bass Mafia Zal Dangerous in the 7-inch. And it's basically like a shad pattern. And look at the wobble on this boot tail on the back. That thing is nice. I haven't really got to use these that much, but from what I've heard, a lot of people's reviews saying that it's a little bit better of a version of a mag draft. I know whenever I throw the mag draft, one of my only big complaints is that when you start to speed it up a little bit, it kind of rolls on you. So I'm hoping this doesn't have the issue, but I still do like to use the mag draft whenever I'm, spawn fishing, throwing it up close, being able to throw it up and cover it. And sometimes you can get those bass that are on beds and just roll this baby up, with a very light hook on it and just let it sit on the bottom and kind of drag it across the bed. Sometimes those big girls, they like to hit big swim baits on bed. So this is another one, but this is more going to be open water for me in that 4 to 5 foot range, and targeting some of those bigger buck bass that are kind of chasing off bait. So those are my 2 recommendations that I like to use for throwing those bigger swim baits. Now let's go into downsizing, and downsizing can be key. A lot of times you're using a bigger bait, bass isn't hitting, you downsize it, cut the bait up a little bit, and you get a lot more hits. So the next one I'm going to go ahead with is one of my favorite swim baits, is the 6 Sense Whale. I really love the wobble and the action on this thing. It gives it a nice wobble in the water. But, fishing this in open water, I've caught a lot of fish on it. And the nice thing is when you downsize, you can go ahead and do a little bit more with it whenever you get to like beds and stuff. You can kind of sit that. If you find a bed, you can go ahead and sit this thing on and kind of swim it a little bit. And it has a nice wiggle to it. So those bass really, will hit that. And it's a downsize, so some of the ones that are a little more shy of biting kind of will pick that up more and want to take it off the bed. And then another one I like to downsize with is this little Divine swim bait. And I think this is a 6 Sense as well. An ice ghost shad, I believe is the color. But this little guy here, it kills it. And you can even use a small little jig head, or you can even put it on, like a little finesse jig head for like a Ned head on it. And this thing will sit up in the water like this, and then you can kind of swim it through. Thing works great. But yeah, like I said, I like to use this like the, I think it's called a Flashy Swimmer, or I'm not sure 100% what the name of these are, but I know you can get these, the Trocar, I believe this is the Trocar one. Just a weighted belly hook, and use that for it. Or I just found these recently, as they have these little willow head, these little vibrating jig heads by Z-Man. And it kind of gives it a really good, like a chatterbait action to it. It's pretty nice. So I like using that as well. So that really takes cover of the swim bait. One of them's kind of, I guess you would call it a swim bait, but I don't really use it for that. I think if you go ahead and go with this thing, it's the Berkeley Gilly. Now, to me, honestly, if you don't use at least the 110 size, which is this one, it's not even worth using because the action is not that good. But I have noticed these things when you put either like a small circle hook on it or a small, wide gap hook through the belly. And you could even add a weight to it, but honestly, it gives it a nice waving action, and when you're sitting it on that bed and you move it, it works really good through the water. Honestly, you could even use a Tokyo rig with it. But that's another good bait for sitting on the bed. But let's get back to the rest of the hard baits, and then I'll go over more of the soft plastics. Kind of went off base with the swim baits, but I wanted to get those out of the way. So the next thing I really like to use, and a lot of times those bigger girls that are sitting on beds, or those males are sitting there and they're looking up. And there's so many times where I've thrown these 2 different hard baits and just caught some absolute monsters this time of year. And you really have to work it slow, but I like going ahead and using, classic, hollow body frog. And this is a scum frog. I believe the color's toad, but it's one of my favorite colors. You can use a shad pattern, or you can go with something more of a bluegill pattern. That's what you're mimicking. You're mimicking those bluegill, that are going after the bait on the bed, and those bass are going to be trying to push those off or kick them off of the bed. So you're mimicking exactly the natural bait that's going to be, you know, the natural threat to the bass that's going to be bedding. So popping this baby, you can either use a popping frog. Like I said, because of the cover and stuff, I like to just use a regular standard frog. But I really like the scum frogs. And then another one I really like to use is the Booyah Pad Crasher. And I think there's a smoky color. But, you know, depending on the scenario, it's murky, you know, the time of day, you know, you're going to change up your color. But like I said, you can't go wrong with either a shad pattern or using a bluegill pattern for that. So next, another bait I really like to use is a popper. Popper's kind of the same scenario. This, you're getting a little more pop on the top. I would use it more towards open water if you don't have lily pads and stuff around because of the treble hooks. But this thing works great. I've caught a few 7-pounders during the spawn, and they just absolutely hate this thing when it's making that popping noise. Drives them insane. So there's another one I like to use. Now let's go into the soft plastics. First off, I like to go ahead and stick with these colors. I like to either use white, green pumpkin, a black and blue, or something that's like has a blue or green mixture in it, kind of like Okeechobee crawl. And then I like to use Alabama crawl, which I think is the best in this scenario for me of being more like a bluegill. You get that greenish brown color, and then you also get that orange flashy color to it. This is a Pit Boss. There's not many appendages on it. I mean, you just got these down at the bottom, so they're flapping around and you just drag it through. Very simplistic, not too much to it, but gives off a good action in the water. The next one I like to use is the Vile Bug. This thing's awesome. I really like it. It's very simple, good for punching, but, you know, also putting on those beds, there's, like I said, not much to it, but there's a good bit of action you get on the tail with those pinchers. Another one I like to really use is the Stinger by Gambler Lures. A lot of the Gambler baits are awesome. I mean, they're a Florida company, so they really drive home a lot of those really good baits to use in Florida, and they know exactly what, you know, we like to use here, so they do a really good job at that. But I really like this one. I think this is the 5.25 in the Stinger, so it's a little bit of a bigger bait. So this is one I'm going to use a lot more if I'm trying to give that bigger presentation on a bed. This thing is awesome. All right, and then it gets very simple with these next two, and they are the kind of the staples of really any kind of bed fishing. One's a new one, and one's sort of the original. I don't have a Yamamoto, but this is a Yum, just a Yum Dinger. Any kind of stick bait, man. You can either wacky rig this thing, or you can Texas rig it. Throw it on a bed, man. Get some almost every time. I like to use a white color. For the most part, white seems to be the best for me because I can see it better on the bed. I can keep that distance and I'm not interfering with that bass to kind of spook it or get it a little unsettled. But using any kind of stick bait is amazing. And then this next one, I think it's called a Yamatakuza, I think, or Yamakuza or something. But this is a Yamamoto, and it's like a stick bait, but it's got this little, like, tail on the back. It's pretty fat, but I've noticed this thing does killer. Absolutely killer with some big bass. So I haven't used this yet for the spawn, but I'm super excited to use this. I highly recommend this guy. But if you can get away with it when you're using soft plastics, go ahead and go weightless. But I'll show you the options I like to use for a weight. Usually only go up to like a 1/8 or a 1/16. Sometimes you can go a little bit bigger here. But either way, I try not to put too much weight on it. The less weight, the better, because you're getting a slower fall the less weight you have on it. Which a fast fall can be good sometimes, but I do like to have that slow fall coming down. It doesn't disturb the bass as much. And then I can go ahead and drag that thing really slow on the bottom, and it's giving a lot of action. And but yeah, weight is good, especially if there's a lot of current or whatnot that you need to push through, or if there's a lot of brush. That way you can kind of have a little more weight to pull it through there. But I like to kind of stay away from the weight, especially whenever I'm throwing either a stick bait or throwing this little guy right here. With the crawl, I usually do like to use a little bit of a weight and put a peg on it, a bobber stop, so that keeps it, you know, kind of tight in there. And then for a hook, I like to use a 3/0, just a straight flipping hook. Usually a 3/0's good, 3/4 at most. And then just using like wide gap but heavy wire whenever I'm using. And it's definitely important to have that heavy wire because you want a really stout hook for those big fish. And that's really going to be it. I rambled on a good bit, but those are my favorite things to use during the spawn. You know, I hope this helps you guys. Yeah, go out and catch some monsters for the spawn, and I'll try to do the same. And until next time, y'all, peace.